Hi folks, it's hard to come up with new intros to this, so I'm just going to say, why don't we just dive into the box and take a look at this beautiful handmade box. Maybe someday if anyone is watching these videos and says, hey, I'd like to know how he makes those boxes, I can make a whole video about how to make yourself a nice little comic book box. So anyone has an interest in that, again, make a comment or send me an eBay message and I can figure out a way to do that. So on to the comics. This first batch here, this is from 1 to all. So I put all the numbered series in the very beginning before A. I don't know how others do it, but that's how I did it. So anyway, this is called First Issue Special. And this is kind of like a tryout book where they would have a character and then they would have a story about it and see how sales did and whether or not they wanted to continue with those characters. Metamorpho was an existing character from the 60s who I believe was created by Barbara Frayden or Ramona Frayden. I think that was who that was. But anyway, didn't really catch on with his own series. He did have his own series for a while, but it didn't really carry on for a long time. So I think they were trying to get him more involved and see if they could do it again. So this is an issue of that. And then there's Creeper, another character who always kind of appeared on the fringes of DC, but never really caught on. And he did have his own series. I think that went 6 issues in the 60s. So DC was always trying, and I appreciated the fact that they did this to try to give him more exposure. Now, Warlord was one that came on, and actually they did have a series, and I think that one went on for over 100 issues. So this is Mike Grell with Warlord. It says first DC issue, and I don't really know if Warlord appeared somewhere else. I probably should, but all I know about is the DC stuff. But this is the first issue that First Issue Special actually worked and launched a new title, so that worked really well for DC. This is Codename Assassin, and this is Return of the New Gods, which I think that this was originally New Gods by Jack Kirby, and then I think after this, Return of the New Gods as a series came out by I can't remember who the creative team was, but anyway, they did go on for a few issues after this. So this was another one that actually worked a little bit. But here's Mr. Miracle and Big Barda, and they have become a larger part of the overall DC universe. So call that one a success too. This is 1963, which was Alan Moore, author of Swamp Thing, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, just countless things that Alan Moore did that were influential on the 80s and 90s comic book marketplace. This is 1963, which was an homage to 1960s Marvel. So all these stories are written and drawn in the style of 1960s Marvel with a little bit of a modern flair. But unfortunately, they were all one issue. They were all one-offs, so no one escapes the fury. That was the only time that character appeared, which is unfortunate because it would have been fun to see these as a continuing series. There's Horus, Lord of Light. And as you can see, the art is very reminiscent of well-known artists from the 60s. So it's a very great tribute to that era. Here's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is looks like it's written and drawn by Jack Kirby. So, you can't go wrong with Jack Kirby. He's always very interesting. Even if it isn't the greatest stuff, it's still definitely worth reading because he was such a incredible creative force.
And there's a movie about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on the movie, I believe. It's either based on concepts from the Stanley Kubrick movie production. So yeah, this must have come out after the movie, and they just licensed it and decided to make a comic book out of it, which is fun. This is 4001 AD. I honestly don't know much about this, but there it is. DC 5-star superhero spectacular. So it's stories with each of the 5 characters you see pictured here. Surprisingly, Superman's not in this, but it looks like Batman, Aquaman, Green Lantern, Flash, and Atom are featured. So 1977, good stuff. Adam Strange. This was an interesting miniseries. I didn't know much about Adam Strange until this came out, and it's really interesting to see that take on him. Adolescent black belt hamsters. This was kind of like when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. I think there were a lot of companies that were trying to make derivative versions of that and see if they would catch on. There's adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters. So they've got, there you go. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. If they can make movies out of Minecraft, then they can make comic books out of board games. So DC certainly tried. And that went on for 10 issues at least. So obviously they must have had some fun stuff going on there. And now, Adventure Comics, Superboy as a Superman as a young boy, Superboy, Adventure Comics 309. So this is fairly old. It's also a 12 center. So unfortunately it has this writing on the front, but it still would be a nice issue to have. The condition's not bad considering how old this probably is. So, but here are some other ones. 339. This one's not in as good a condition, but still, it's 359. It's pretty old. 361, and there's 363, which has a rolled spine, unfortunately, but still. And I keep saying that, so I'll just stop. And then Supergirl took over Adventure Comics for a while. This is issue 386. I think this was in the later 60s, 68, 69. So we have some Supergirl stuff. And then Adventure Comics kind of moved into various characters until they tried to figure out a new direction. So there's Weird Adventure Comics, there's some issues with Spectre, and then of course they settled on Aquaman in the mid-70s. So there were more than a few issues that featured Aquaman. And that went on probably for about 20 or 30 issues. And then Adventure Comics went to the dollar size issues, and they had multiple characters at the top. You can see they have a list of characters that are featured. And then here's the original Starman with Plastic Man. So they were really struggling, I think, to find a direction for this title. Dial H for Heroes. I don't know how popular this series was, but not coincidentally, this Adventure Comics was kind of discontinued shortly after this started. So I think that DC just didn't know what to do with this title anymore. So I think they got up to somewhere in the 490s in comic book format, and then they switched over to digest book format, and then they finished the series somewhat not too long numerically after this issue, which is 489. So here's Adventures of the Outsiders, which, if you remember, or if you saw an earlier video about Batman and the Outsiders was the beginning. Then they took Batman out and just made it Adventures of the Outsiders. So this is more or less a continuation of that title, just the Outsiders without Batman. And that went on for a while. So yeah, this is great Alan Davis art, which is definitely worth checking out. I mean, Mike W. Barr is a great writer, but the Alan Davis art is definitely a highlight of this. Adventures on the Planet of the Apes, another Marvel product based on a popular movie of the 70s. And this is issue 11. And I think I touched on this title before. Agent X was in another video. It's written by Gail Simone, and I think this was kind of a comic character that was inspired by Deadpool. I'm not sure what the exact relationship is, and I think I speculated on this before, but Agent X just reminds me a lot of Deadpool, but it's by Gail Simone, who's a very good creator. She's done great stuff, including Black Canary and things like that. So Agent X is definitely worth checking out. Plus the art looks really cool too. So yeah, it's very inventive and creative stuff. And then Airboy. This was a series that came out from Eclipse Comics in the 80s. When before Image, there were independent companies, just that they didn't manage to make as big a splash as Image. But they always had Eclipse, Comico, I think, and First. They had great titles and really interesting creators who eventually wound up in the larger Marvel or DC universe, but they all got their start somewhere. That's a Malibu comic. And of course, this is Alf, based on a TV show, of course. Alice Cooper, based on a musician. And this is Alien Nation, which is based on a movie. Nice pun. All-Star Comics. I think I also touched on this one before in another box. This was a continuation of a series from the 30s and 40s, and introduced Power Girl, and of course she's featured there on the cover. So this was another series that went on for, I think this went on for about 20 issues when they relaunched it in the 70s, but it just didn't have enough staying power, which is unfortunate.
Is the Justice Society the same thing as the Justice League of America?
Not exactly. They're kind of a predecessor of the Justice League. So they were kind of the 40s, 50s version of the Justice League, and then the Justice League, like after the Seduction of the Innocent, which happened in the 50s, and Marvel and DC both were kind of chopped off at the knees because of all the regulations, and it was kind of really just an attack on EC Comics, which was just pretty much destroying everybody in terms of comic book sales. So they were looking for a way to weaken them. So the Congress got involved and you know, put all sorts of regulations that you couldn't depict this and you couldn't depict that in comic books. And then Marvel and DC kind of slowly rose from the ashes and tried to figure out what they could do. And All-Star was one of the victims of that, because I think they stopped the series and then wound up relaunching it later. But there was definitely a hiatus because of all that. But they just kind of got caught up in that kind of madness. It was a weird time, and there are probably plenty of other videos on YouTube about the EC Comics and Seduction of the Innocent era of comic books, which would be worth reading because it really had a profound impact on comic books in the 50s. So if you are interested, by all means, please check that out. I wouldn't even, you know, pretend that I know enough about it to go into detail here. Anyway, All-Star Squadron. This was absolutely one of my favorite comics in the early 80s. And when this launched, it was kind of, it took place in the 40s, so it featured all those great characters from that All-Star, from that Justice Society era, just in a modern take, in a modern format. That's a nice copy of #1.
With cards, I see.
These are pictures, actually. So this is them deciding who's going to be on the team.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, this was just really great stuff. Roy Thomas was the writer, and he was a comic book historian, so he really got into these characters, and I mean, I just love this series. This was another series that ended before its proper time because of Crisis on Infinite Earths. A lot of titles were canceled because of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and this was one of them. That was when, in the 80s, DC decided that they had too many Earths. There was Earth X, there was Earth 1, there was Earth Prime, there was all these other Earths, and they wanted to combine everything and get rid of all the extra confusion. So they had all these worlds destroyed and said there was only one DC universe. And of course, over the years, they've undone that. But at the time, something like All-Star Squadron couldn't survive because, these characters took place in the 40s. So, this is World War II era comics from the 80s, which are, again, just excellent. And, suffered an untimely demise because of Crisis. But they went on for about 30 or 40 issues before they finally were canceled. So they did get a good run. And this is All-Star Squadron, which crossed over with Justice League. And they used to have Justice League, Justice Society crossovers and things like that. So this is kind of continuing that tradition of having crossover books between the superhero teams in DC. So there's Justice League, Justice Society, and All-Star Squadron. So yeah, and I mean I can't say enough about how good this was. This was definitely one of my favorites at the time. So there's 35. And this is issue 42. So yeah, they started to, once they got into this era, this was when they were getting close. So here's the Crisis banner across the top, and this is issue 50. And I think the series ended sometime in the 60s. And after that, they kind of started doing, one-offs and things like that, like Awesome Origin of Robot Man. The series didn't last much longer after this issue. This is issue 63. And then these annuals took place while the series was going on, and really excellent stuff. So can't recommend All-Star Squadron highly enough. But so that's it for the A's. And again, thank you very much for paying attention. And maybe I dropped some knowledge, and maybe you'll be interested in some of the series that I mentioned here. But if you're interested in any of that stuff, by all means, please send a message or make a comment below. Thank you, and have a good day.